Support. Give me a subscribe. 200 subs by September 30th. That's the goal. Hello and welcome to day 15. It's 10 and a 5. Day 15 of RPG A Day 2020. Thank you very much for helping me celebrate the 7th year of this amazing creative experiment. Today's word is frame. Frame. Can I fit my head in the frame? Why does it always look like my room is lopsided when you look at this in the frame? That picture needs to be put in a frame. How do we frame this story? How do we frame this scene? Frame. A lot of ways you could interpret that word, but today we're going to take a look at something, a role-playing story from my vast history of how a NPC framed the player characters. Because this goes to show in furthering how by framing a story for NPCs, they can impact the game in a lot greater way than just being E, the guy who sold you those bag of turnips, or B, the guy you killed because you didn't want to pay him the price for the bag of turnips. Far too often, NPCs are fire and forget. You could spend hours writing up the intricate backstory and needs and wants and who this NPC is and how they're going to interact in the game and whatever, and their long plot, only to find out that the players want nothing to do with this mouth breather and they keep going on their way. Or worse, they kill them. I can think of plenty of times when my players have murder hoboed an NPC for no reason whatsoever other than they thought they're going to get extra stuff out of it. And I'm in plenty of games lately where people are just like, let's kill that motherfucker. Why? We don't get anything, but whatever. So, a long time ago, when I was in college, back when dinosaurs still roamed the earth and Pluto was still a planet. Poor Pluto. I played in a game. And there was an encounter with a group of NPCs, and sadly, the murder hobo in the party decided to go aggro on these NPCs. There was no reason to. These were just a group of traveling whatever. Probably people we never would have seen again. But the murder hobo in the group at the time decided something dark side set him off, and he went murder hobo on them. And so a fight broke out where half of us are trying to break up the fight. It's like strike to stun. I hit him with the blunt end. I don't want to kill this guy. And him and like one other person were like, fuck it, Leroy Jenkins. Of course, this was before Leroy Jenkins, but still, you get the general idea. Anyways, one of the NPCs survived. And we convinced the murder hobo to let him go. We're like, we're sorry. Let's get out of here. Okay, and then we forgot about it. But the DM didn't forget about it. And the DM asked themselves, what would this person do if this happened in real life? Or what would I do if this happened to me? Or how would this play out in a movie? What would this NPC who survived and just saw his friends, family, loved ones, companions slaughtered by these supposed heroes for no reason whatsoever? Would they seek revenge? They're just one guy. How does one guy seek revenge against a group of power-hungry maniacs who are like, oh, we're the heroes? And the people in town are like, well, they killed the monsters. I guess they're the heroes. What does this one guy do? Well, goes to the authorities in the next town over. And he explains the story from his point of view. How these strangers attacked and killed his friends and family for no reason whatsoever. And he then placed a bounty on them. So when our party got to that town, we began to see wanted posters with our faces on them. And when we went into stories or the bar or talked to NPCs, the reactions were always negative because this guy had framed us. I mean, we had done what he said he'd done, but he'd said it in such a way that to make us out as criminals, like in the Old West, you know? And all these people had heard of us was that we were murderers. And thus that reputation stuck with us. And then he would keep going, trying to figure out where we would go next and get there ahead of us and post the wanted posters, tell people about us, frame us. He started committing crimes and doing things and then finding ways to blame it on us. So as this continued going on, and it took us a while to figure it out what was going on until somebody described the guy, and one of us was like, wait a minute, isn't that? And then suddenly, like, half a year later, we realized that in between all the adventuring we're doing, the person who is framing us is this guy from like a year ago, the survivor. And then we're like, oh, fuck. And of course, he's had a year to build up. He's gotten experience for the stuff he's done. He's done adventuring. He's built up his own adventuring band. He's found people and convinced them, we're villains. He's gone back to places we've already been and talked to people or found other monsters that survived us or whatever. And he's been like, come on, join me and we will get them. So by the time the confrontation happened again, of course, we're mad at this guy, but also it's completely understandable as mad at this guy. And this guy has turned into this master, villain. And all he's really done is use the world as it's set in place against us by posting bounties and reporting us to the authorities and finding other victims of our, atrocities, i.e. the one goblin we left alive or whatever, or the villagers who were mad at us because we, did typical adventuring things or, whatever. So now there is this world that is actively working against us because he has framed us. He has blamed us for atrocities that we did commit in his eyes and atrocities we didn't commit because he's just taking the ball and running it. So that is a very clever way that the GM used the NPCs to make the life of the player characters that much harder. And had we just not killed those people, had we just worked with them or ignored them, that is a whole chunk of misery we could have avoided. But because the DM framed the questions of, well, what would this guy do in their mind, and then played out the scenarios and wondered, well, okay, he'd go to another town and he'd seek for aid, he'd talk to the authorities and he'd post a bounty and he'd look for other people whose lives we'd messed up. And if there was a situation he could maybe tilt to his favor to turn the camera against us, he framed his personal narrative in such a way that we had gone from being the heroes to, as far as many of the NPCs in various towns perceived us, the villains. And of course, since we weren't really doing anything to prevent that, I mean, one of us was walking around being all necromancer with a robe of skulls and whatever, and my character had a shield that looked like a demon face that was always slobbering like because it was like this living shield. I mean, we look like typical adventurers, but if you look at typical adventurers, they kind of look like a super villain group. So yeah, it was very easy for him to turn the world against us. And obviously, because he had the law on his side, there wasn't very little that we could do to stop him. Support me, Coke. Coke. I will sell out. So there you go. That is how a DM framed the narrative of an NPC and turned a 0 level, first level nothing into a story arc that plagued us for almost 2 years. And then just when we thought the story was ended and we'd finally dealt with that individual, the DM pulled another fast one on us and had that NPC marry one of the player characters' sister. So now that player had to deal with the fact that this individual was their brother-in-law. We had turned a nobody into an individual, a villain, whose whole goal was to ruin our lives. But he did it all within the framework of the laws of the world by framing the narrative so the whole world slowly tilted against us. And that is my story about the creative work used to create. I cannot talk. Sorry. The creative use of the word frame to change the frame of the narrative. DMs, feel free to change the frame of the narratives. Don't let player characters just get off scot-free if they're doing things in the civilized world that can be frowned upon. Oh, you argued and pissed off an NPC? You think that NPC is just going to sit there and let it go? No, they're going to do something about it. You murdered a bunch of, strangers for no reason other than you thought they might have EP and stuff, but one of them got away. You think they're going to forget it? No, they're going to do something about it. They're murder hobering their way through the surface world. There's going to be repercussions. Frame the world of the game to deal with whatever the players do, and then ask yourself, okay, how would the world react to this, idiot? I'll talk to you later, because the phone's ringing.